For over 40 years, the shadow of one man had defined the Libyan horizon. He had weathered coups, defied international sanctions, and outlasted his enemies, becoming what seemed a permanent fixture of power. Then, in the year 2011, the nation he commanded erupted in a firestorm of violence. Libya's cities fractured, their streets turning into brutal, unforgiving battlegrounds. For Muammar Gaddafi, the end would not arrive in a gilded palace or a solemn courtroom. It would find him on the ground, surrounded by fury, a bloody and visceral conclusion to a lifetime of absolute rule. In the vast, silent expanse of the Libyan desert, a new and unpredictable power was stirring. From these sands emerged Muammar Gaddafi, born into a poor Bedouin family in 1942 near the coastal town of Sirte. The rigid discipline of the military provided his path forward, taking him from Libyan academies to further training in the United Kingdom, where he observed the very powers he would one day defy. In 1969, at just 27 years old, the ambitious young officer led a group of revolutionaries in a swift, bloodless coup, deposing the aging King Idris. With the monarchy abolished, Gaddafi moved to consolidate his authority, shuttering American and British military bases and nationalizing the country's colossal oil industry. He then unveiled his own political system, the Jamahiriya, a so-called state of the masses that promised direct power to the people, while in truth, all power remained firmly in his hands. Through the 1970s and 80s, his name became synonymous with radicalism as he openly backed armed groups across the globe. The West's suspicion of him as a sponsor of terror hardened into conviction after the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, an atrocity that killed 270 people. In the aftermath, Libya was buried under years of heavy international sanctions, yet Gaddafi simultaneously cast himself as a champion of Pan-African and Pan-Arab unity, a defiant leader standing against the West. By the 2000s, a calculated change began. He softened his image, renounced his weapons programs, and reopened diplomatic ties, attempting to rebuild Libya's shattered economy. But within the nation's borders, decades of iron-fisted rule had bred a deep resentment. With political parties banned and freedom of speech non-existent, corruption festered, channeling the nation's oil wealth into the pockets of a loyal elite. While Gaddafi and his family indulged in opulent luxury, a generation of Libyans struggled, their anger quietly simmering just beneath the surface. The winds of change that had swept through Tunisia and Egypt were now gathering over the Libyan coast. For decades, a deep current of discontent had run just beneath the surface of daily life, and as the region watched long-standing rulers fall, it was only a matter of time before that current broke through. In the eastern city of Benghazi, the fever of revolution took hold. The spark finally ignited on the 15th of February 2011 when a small group gathered outside a police station. They were the families of political prisoners, demanding the release of human rights lawyer Fatih Terbil, who had been arrested for speaking of a national wound, the Abu Salim prison massacre of 1996, where over 1,200 inmates had been executed by Gaddafi's forces. What began as a plea for one man's freedom quickly swelled into a roar for the nations. By February 17th, a date seared into memory as the Day of Rage, thousands poured into the streets of Benghazi, Baida, Tobruk, and Derna. Their calls were for an end to dictatorship, poverty, and repression, but the regime answered with violence. Security forces, including the feared Internal Security Agency, opened fire on the crowds. The response was immediate and brutal. Overwhelmed hospitals reported more than 230 people killed in just 4 days, many shot in the chest and head. The cold signature of live ammunition fired into unarmed gatherings. As snipers took up positions on rooftops, state media broadcast claims of foreign agents and drugged youths. Gaddafi's own son, Saif al-Islam, appeared on television to deliver a chilling ultimatum, warning that rivers of blood would flow if the protests did not cease. But the threats only hardened their resolve. Instead of scattering, the people stood firm, and soon the regime began to fracture from within. By the end of February, soldiers in Benghazi were refusing orders to shoot civilians. In a decisive turn, the 36th Brigade, under Major General Suleiman Mahmoud, defected, joining the rebellion and helping to seize control of the city. As government buildings burned, it was clear that the first battle had been won. The smoke from burning government buildings now stained the sky. Police stations fell to angry crowds, their arsenals emptied and distributed among the protesters. By the 24th of February, the vast eastern territories of Libya had slipped entirely from Gaddafi's grasp, with cities like Tobruk and Misrata convulsing in bitter street-to-street fighting. As the uprising armed itself with rifles seized from military bases, fissures appeared even within Gaddafi's most loyal forces. Some Air Force pilots, ordered to bomb their own cities, defied their commanders and flew their jets to the island of Malta, seeking asylum. From this chaotic defiance, a nascent opposition government began to form in Benghazi, officially announcing itself as the National Transitional Council on the 27th of February. Led by the former Justice Minister Mustafa Abdul Jalil, it was a fragile promise of a Libya free from Gaddafi's rule. Meanwhile, in the west, Gaddafi's grip remained unbroken on the capital of Tripoli and its surroundings. His power was anchored by loyalist strongholds and elite units like the Khamis Brigade, commanded by his own son and equipped with tanks and heavy artillery. To crush the rebellion, the regime bolstered its ranks with foreign fighters, mercenaries drawn from the deserts of Chad, Mali, and Niger. By early March of 2011, the conflict had crossed a terrifying new threshold. Gaddafi's forces unleashed the full weight of his military arsenal, using air power and tanks to claw back rebel-held cities. Across television screens worldwide, the brutal reality unfolded in grainy, horrifying detail, showing civilian neighborhoods shattered by shelling. A dreadful premonition settled over the international community that if Gaddafi's columns reached Benghazi, the world would witness a massacre. In the corridors of power, the frantic rhythm of diplomacy was quickening to the pace of war. On March 12th, the Arab League convened in Cairo, issuing a landmark call for a no-fly zone over Libya, a decision that provided the crucial regional endorsement for outside intervention. Seizing the momentum, France and the United Kingdom immediately pressed the United Nations for decisive action. The debate culminated on March 17, 2011, when the Security Council adopted Resolution 1973. With 10 votes in favor and 5 abstentions, including Russia and China, the resolution authorized all necessary measures to shield civilians from harm. It was a mandate that banned military flights, demanded an immediate ceasefire, and set the stage for what was to come. Just 2 days later, the night sky over Tripoli lit up with fire. The initial assault, codenamed Operation Odyssey Dawn, was led by a coalition including the United States, France, Britain, Canada, and Italy. Over 110 Tomahawk cruise missiles streaked from American and British warships in the Mediterranean, slamming into air defense systems, radar installations, and command centers. At the same time, French jets tore through tank columns advancing on Benghazi, turning Gaddafi's offensive into a desperate retreat. By March 23rd, the mission had evolved. Command consolidated under NATO, and the operation was renamed Unified Protector, bringing together 28 member states and partners like Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan. The air campaign became a systematic dismantling of Gaddafi's military infrastructure, his MiG-23 fighters and Sukhoi bombers obliterated on their bases. Near Misrata and Zintan, dozens of tanks and armored vehicles were reduced to scorched metal within the first 2 weeks. At sea, NATO warships enforced a strict arms embargo, patrolling the Libyan coastline to choke off any supply of weapons to Gaddafi's beleaguered forces. Yet, even as his war machine crumbled, the colonel himself remained unbroken. His voice, defiant and furious, crackled across state television, accusing NATO of colonial ambitions and a plot to steal Libya's oil. He branded the rebels as rats and traitors, vowing to cleanse the country street by street. His attempts to claw back the sky with Russian-made missiles were futile. The raids continued, relentless and unanswered. The long, hot summer of 2011 was drawing to a close, and with it, an era. As NATO's relentless aerial campaign starved Muammar Gaddafi's regime of supplies, weapons, and command, his military machine began to fracture. From the western mountains, the Misrata front, and the east, rebel columns converged on the capital, a three-pronged advance tightening around the throat of the regime. On the 20th of August, the signal was given for Operation Mermaid Dawn, the final audacious assault on Tripoli. The plan was a masterstroke of coordination. As sleeper cells smuggled into the city rose up from within, their attacks synchronized with the thunderous arrival of armed convoys at the city's edge. For 5 agonizing days, the capital descended into a storm of street-to-street fighting. The neighborhoods of Tajura and Souk al-Jumaa became a deadly maze of barricades and ambushes. Loyalist snipers nested in high windows, and tanks held key intersections, but they could not stem the tide. Overwhelmed by the sheer speed and momentum of the rebel advance, Gaddafi's soldiers began to surrender in droves, some simply melting away into the chaos, their uniforms abandoned. On August 23rd, the rebels breached the walls of Bab al-Azizia, the dictator's fortified compound and the symbolic heart of his 4-decade rule. Inside the sprawling complex of concrete bunkers and subterranean tunnels, they found a strange tableau of abandoned power, discarded weapons, scattered documents, and opulent luxuries left behind in a desperate hurry. But the gilded cage was empty. Gaddafi had vanished, having slipped out of the city days before the final assault began. While his wife Safieh, his daughter Aisha, and his sons Hannibal and Mohammed fled across the border into Algeria, the dictator himself remained a ghost in his own country, moving between safe houses under the protection of loyal tribes. Another son, Saadi, would find his way to Niger, only to be detained. But the father refused to abandon his homeland, believing that to leave Libya was to concede ultimate defeat. Instead, he made his way toward the coastal city of Sirte, a stronghold 450 kilometers from Tripoli. This was not just his hometown. It was a city he had personally molded in his own image, the last bastion of his power. The coastal city was a monument to his own ambition. Now, it was becoming his tomb. He had once envisioned Sirte as the capital for a United States of Africa, shaping its skyline with modern buildings and wide boulevards where he hosted continental summits. But when Muammar Gaddafi arrived in early September of 2011, it was as a fugitive. With him were the last remnants of his power, close aides, bodyguards, and fighters from his own Gaddafi tribe, whose influence in the area ran deep. His 2 sons, the military commander Mutassim and his political heir Saif al-Islam, moved like shadows through the city's hidden corners. With Tripoli fallen, Sirte had become the final holdout, an island of defiance cut off from the world. Supplies dwindled and communications failed, yet Gaddafi refused to contemplate surrender or exile. By the second week of September, the forces of the National Transitional Council began to gather, their ranks swelling with thousands of fighters from brigades across the country. Recognized by many nations as Libya's official government, their objective was absolute: capture the fallen dictator and claim total control. Units from Misrata, Benghazi, and Zintan advanced from the east and west, expecting a swift victory. They found instead a city transformed into a fortress, Loyalist snipers and artillery crews had taken up defensive positions in homes, schools, and hospitals, turning civilian structures into deadly bastions. The streets themselves were seeded with death, as landmines and improvised explosive devices lay hidden along the main thoroughfares. Beginning in mid-September, the NTC unleashed a relentless bombardment. Grad rockets, mortars, and tank shells pounded the city day after day, while NATO aircraft struck key targets from above, shattering bunkers and command posts. As the city's infrastructure crumbled under the assault, panicked civilians attempting to flee found themselves trapped in the crossfire. Inside the tightening cordon, Gaddafi and his inner circle moved constantly between abandoned homes and underground shelters, desperate to evade detection. The clear chain of command had dissolved, and loyalist morale was sinking under the weight of the siege. Still, Gaddafi issued defiant orders to resist, while his son Mutassim remained in charge of the city's defenses, coordinating the last desperate efforts to hold back the tide. By the end of September, Sirte was completely encircled. The NTC controlled the outskirts, initiating a slow and brutal advance, one block at a time. Progress was measured in meters and paid for in blood, as sniper fire and vicious street battles turned the city into a killing ground where hundreds of fighters would fall. The sky above Sirte had become an enemy territory, patrolled day and night. NATO aircraft prowled the airspace, their engines a constant menacing hum as drones and surveillance jets hunted for the faintest heat signature or radio signal. In response, Gaddafi had ordered a return to an earlier age, enforcing a strict electronic silence on his besieged followers. All phones and radios were forbidden, their satellite phones rarely powered on, leaving them reliant on human runners who slipped through the city's ruins to carry messages between hideouts. Below this aerial watch, the city was starving. With water and electricity cut off, the group survived on canned goods and dry rations, scavenging what they could from shattered storefronts. The roughly 200 fighters who remained loyal, mostly from his own tribe, suffered from hunger, dehydration, and sickness. Wounded men were treated with the most basic of tools, as medical supplies had long since run dry. Among them was Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, Libya's defense minister, one of the last of a now decimated inner circle. Gaddafi himself was a ghost of the strongman who once dominated Libyan television. Eyewitnesses described a man physically diminished by the siege, his face pale and gaunt, his beard grown longer and whiter. Plagued by high blood pressure and the immense stress of his predicament, he was visibly fading. Yet despite his failing health, his resolve had not broken. Surrender or exile were not options he would entertain. After the fall of Tripoli, his public voice had vanished. The regular appearances on state television were replaced by a deep silence, a calculated strategy to sow confusion. He feared that any broadcast, any leaked image, would pinpoint his location for a NATO airstrike. He wanted his enemies to believe he might already be dead, or perhaps somewhere else entirely. But he was still planning one final move. His goal was to break through the siege and flee south, aiming for the desert city of Sabha, or even across the border into Niger, where others from his government had already found refuge. But every exit was a death trap. Rebel forces monitored the roads, attacking or turning back any convoy that attempted to escape the city's collapsing perimeter. With no way out and no safe place to hide, desperation began to set in. The cornered fighters slept in shifts, some standing guard while others found uneasy rest behind barricades of sandbags and debris. They worked to shield their vehicles from the drones that circled endlessly overhead, but their world was shrinking, compressed by the tightening siege and the constant bombing that made each day harder than the last. The siege tightened its grip, squeezing the life from the city's last defiant corners. For those trapped inside Sirte, each passing day became an exercise in survival. By mid-October, it was clear that Colonel Gaddafi could not hold out much longer, and on the 19th, he made the decision to escape. That night, his remaining inner circle began preparing for a desperate flight. The plan was to form a sprawling convoy of more than 50 vehicles, a mix of pickup trucks and SUVs bristling with machine guns and anti-aircraft weapons. Some were laden with ammunition, while others carried Gaddafi's personal staff, senior military officers, and his most trusted loyalists. Among them were his son Mutassim, his defense minister Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr, and his security chief Mansour Dal. This escape was a gamble on darkness. At around 8 o'clock in the evening, the column began to move, snaking through the darkened streets with headlights extinguished, hugging the shadows of ruined buildings. They aimed for the desert route southwest, toward Wadi Zamzam, a path they hoped would lead them across the border into Niger or Algeria. The night, they prayed, would be their shield. But they were not unobserved. High above, NATO surveillance drones had maintained a continuous, unblinking watch over Sirte for weeks. American and French intelligence had been monitoring for any unusual movement, any sign that Gaddafi might try to flee. That same night, a U.S. Predator drone registered the distinct heat signatures of a convoy forming and slipping out of the city. As dawn broke on the 20th of October, the column was spotted again, now moving slowly along the western outskirts. At 8:30 in the morning, NATO's final move came. From a Predator drone controlled miles away, a Hellfire missile descended, striking one of the lead vehicles and bringing the front of the convoy to a sudden grinding halt. Just 5 minutes later, French Mirage fighter jets screamed over the area, dropping laser-guided bombs that tore into the rear of the column. Multiple vehicles erupted in blossoms of fire and black smoke. The attack had sealed both ends of the escape route, trapping those in the middle and igniting sheer panic as Gaddafi's guards and fighters tried to respond. The dust of Sirte had barely settled on the dead. A later examination by physicians would place the moment of Muammar Gaddafi's passing at around 1 in the afternoon on October 20th, 2011. He was 69 years old. His remains were then transported to Misrata, a city that had borne some of the war's deepest and most personal scars. There, in the cold confines of a refrigerated meat locker at a local market, his body lay on public display for 3 days under the watch of the city's militia. Hundreds, then thousands, formed long, winding queues for a glimpse, many raising phones to capture a final, morbid image. For some, it was a moment of grim closure. For others, it was simply vengeance. Alongside him were the bodies of his son, Mu'tasim, and his defense minister, Abu Bakr Yunus Jabr. They too had perished soon after their capture, Mu'tasim from gunshots to the neck and chest, Jabr from wounds sustained in the earlier convoy attack. Just 3 days later, on October 23rd, the National Transitional Council made the official declaration: the civil war was over. After more than 8 months of brutal conflict and the loss of over 30,000 lives, Libya was in the hands of new leadership. With the spectacle concluded, the matter of his burial became urgent. Under the cover of darkness on October 25th, Gaddafi's remains were taken to a remote, unmarked location somewhere in the vast western desert. To this day, the precise site of his grave remains a state secret, a final, lingering mystery. His violent end seemed to mirror the very nature of his long and brutal rule. But even in death, the questions he left behind would cast a long shadow.